Hello everyone. Today I am doing a little walkthrough of how to code CKD in the ICD-10 CM. Yes, we have more acronyms to learn, but I promise by the end of this little walkthrough, this will make a lot more sense to you, okay? So let's get started. What is CKD? CKD stands for chronic kidney disease. This is a very serious condition that is divided into 6 levels of severity. It starts with stage 1, that's the least severe, and it goes all the way up to end stage renal disease, which is most commonly called ESRD, and that is the most severe. It often co-occurs with diabetes and hypertension. You can also see it in patients just with obesity or other heart disease conditions. But it is definitely most common in hypertension and diabetes. So there's a lot to learn about CKD. I would recommend you look this up in your medical dictionary, do a little research on it, because it is a very complicated disease, but I really want to stay focused on how we code it for this little walkthrough. So coding for CKD begins in N18, that's where all the codes are. And when you're coding this condition, it is very important that you are following all of the conventions, not just the conventions that are in this section or that are specific to this section, but all the guidelines, all the conventions that we learn throughout using the manual. So what do I mean by that? Well, CKD involves a lot of co-occurring conditions. So you are going to just need to anticipate that you're going to need to use multiple codes whenever you are coding a CKD patient. So that means you need to be aware of not just the guidelines that are impacting CKD, but also guidelines that are impacting diabetes, hypertension, and any of the other associated conditions. Also, a lot of patients with CKD are transplant recipients, or they may be on dialysis, and that adds additional coding situations to the whole coding scenario. So it's just very important to be detailed and be cautious. And I know I'm a broken record, but review the guidelines. Here I have 1C14A listed. But again, if you are coding anything with diabetes or hypertension, any other co-occurring conditions, review those guidelines too. They do apply. And then of course, just our general guidelines are going to be applicable as well. So let's look at an example, and this will all make a little bit more sense, I think. So let's see. We have a patient with end-stage renal disease. Remember, we call that ESRD, currently on hemodialysis. So ESRD with dialysis. The relevant guideline here is going to be 1C14A1. And there's a lot in this 1C14A. But the highlight here for you is going to be here at the end of A1, where it states code N18.6, ESRD is assigned when the provider has documented end-stage renal disease. So kind of like when we were talking about HIV and you could only use B20 when the provider has documented that the patient has HIV rather than suspected or has the symptoms or is being screened. It's the same kind of thing here. We cannot use N18.6 unless the provider has documented that the patient has ESRD. Another thing to be aware of when we're looking at CKD is if the documentation states a stage of CKD and also states ESRD, you would just code the ESRD. So why do I say that? Well, one, it's in the guidelines, but two, end-stage renal disease is going to cover anything less than end-stage renal disease. Does that make sense? So any severity, any complication that's related to stage 4 or 5 or 3 or 2, whatever, that end-stage renal disease covers that. It's more severe than severe CKD. Okay, so it's going to cover anything more mild than end-stage renal disease. So we don't need to code, stage 3 and also end-stage renal disease. We would only code that end-stage renal disease. So I guarantee you there's going to be a question about ESRD on your national exam. So that's why I'm hitting it so hard. Don't worry, we'll look at this in the manual as well. The other issue that is important to note for this particular circumstance is understanding the conventions. Make sure you understand how to use the use additional code convention. This is directing us to use another code, okay? So that's gonna be very important whenever you are coding CKD or ESRD, okay? Let's switch over to the document camera and we'll try this out. If you wanna pause the video now and try to find it yourself, this would be a great time. And then you can join us as we look it up together. Okay, here's my manual. Right now, all I have is ESRD. But let's look at the guidelines so you know what I was talking about. And look, I opened it up right to what I was talking about. If you're using the Bucks, this is on page 27. It is 1C, remember, these are chapter specific, is section C, and we're looking at chapter 14. So this is number 14, and letter A is all about chronic kidney disease. And then what I had specifically referenced in the PowerPoint is right here, and that is stating code in 18.6. ESRD is assigned when the provider has documented ESRD. So that's what I was talking about there. And also number 2, and I think number 3, yep, number 3 are also related to CKD. So these are important to review whenever you are coding ESRD or CKD, okay? So I think we have a good feel on what our code might be here, but let's go ahead and find it in the alpha. Now remember, ESRD is end stage renal disease. So this is describing disease, okay? So we're gonna start with disease. That's what I would do. You might just be able to look up end-stage renal disease or ESRD. That acronym might be in there as well. I haven't checked, but I would start with disease just because I think it's a good practice. So let's start with disease. Okay, and on page 206, I hope you guys can see it. This is on 206, about a third of the way, a little more than a third of the way down, under disease. I'm gonna try to get it to, there we go. It states end-stage renal disease, and it's sending to that in 18.6, right? And that is what the guideline was also sending us to. So if you guessed in 18.6, you were right. All right, so we are gonna go look up in 18.6 because we never code from the alpha. And somebody had asked in a previous discussion if they could add additional tabs. Definitely do. And I would say a tab at N18 is a great place to put one. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put one here. And if you're using the Bucks, that's on 1101. And that's, I would put ESRD. You could put CKD as well. Okay, so N18 is the category. We're looking at N18.6. It's going to state here at the top, code first any associated diabetic chronic kidney disease or hypertensive chronic kidney disease. We don't have any information about those. And it also advises us to use additional code to identify the kidney transplant status. We don't know anything about that, so we do not need to do anything there. Remember, if this guidance is up at the top of the category with that main code, that N18, it applies to everything underneath, okay? So this we do want to check. Now, if we're looking at something like here in 18.5, this excludes note, this is not going to apply to us, okay? We're not looking to use N18.5. We're looking to use N18.6. So the codes that are right directly under those subcodes, the conventions that are right under those subcodes are not related to the whole category, just to that specific code. So in 18.6, we're going to look at, it says end-stage renal disease. So I would mark this as ESRD. So that way you remember it. Yes, please write in your book. It states chronic kidney disease requiring chronic dialysis. So that's basically what in ESRD is. It requires chronic dialysis. It also gives us this note here. It says use an additional code to identify the dialysis status. So this is directing us to use an additional code, and it is sending us right to the code. Yes, you can go and look this up in the alpha and look up dialysis, and it's going to send you to this category most likely. But since we already have it here, Z99.2, we can go look that up. Okay. Okay, and here at the back, it states dependence on renal dialysis. It also has hemodialysis status here, which is what our documentation actually stated was hemodialysis. These excludes notes are not related to what we know, which is just ESRD with dialysis. And so nothing else is jumping out that we need to change or add to this code. We can look up at the top, and there's nothing here that is preventing us from using this code or asking us to change this code. So we're going to use N18.6, and then our second code is going to be Z99.2. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint and see if that is what we got. I always get a little nervous when I jump back to the PowerPoint because I'm hoping that is the correct code. Even I get anxious. Okay, in 18.6, Z99.2, we did it. So hopefully that is what you found. If not, that's okay. This is tricky. This is definitely tricky, but we'll get more practice with it. Let me know your questions in the discussion, and we can get more detailed into this condition or just coding this type of scenario. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.